Don't come home this year. Your sister doesn't want you there. 7 words. That's all it took to exile me from my own family 3 days before Thanksgiving. I couldn't believe my mother could say something so casually cruel, like she was declining a dinner invitation, not erasing her own daughter from existence. The truth is, I'd been the scapegoat my entire life, but hearing it out loud, being told explicitly that my presence was unwanted, that I was the problem, that my sister's comfort mattered more than my belonging, that's when everything shattered. What happened next changed my life in ways I never could have imagined, in ways that turned betrayal into the greatest blessing I never asked for. Then, years later, at my wedding in front of over 150 people, my biological parents sat in the back row and watched as strangers, people who'd chosen me when they had every reason not to, walked me down the aisle, claimed me as their daughter, and showed the world what real family actually looks like. This is a story about being backstabbed by blood, about family drama that destroys and chosen family that rebuilds, about vengeance that looks nothing like punishment and everything like freedom. This is about the shocking moment when you realize the people who humiliated you by rejecting you actually did you the biggest favor of your life. This is about infidelity to the parent-child bond, about lies disguised as love, about being cheated out of belonging and then finding it in the most unexpected place. And this is about karma, not the revenge kind, but the kind that restores, that heals, that proves the universe has better plans than the ones written by people too broken to love you right. They told me I was too much, caused too much drama, needed to learn my place. The revealed truth? They were the ones writing the drama, and I was just the character they needed to blame so they could avoid looking at themselves. My name is Leah Mitchell. Well, it was Leah Mitchell. Now it's Leah Morrison, legally, officially, permanently. And that change represents everything about this story you need to understand. I'm 34 years old, and 8 years ago, I spent Thanksgiving alone in a Chicago apartment, crying over a family photo posted on Instagram that showed everyone smiling around a table with no empty chair for me, no acknowledgement I'd ever existed. I was humiliated, shamed, mocked by my own biology, convinced that something about me was fundamentally unlovable. But what I didn't know, sitting there in my tiny apartment with my dignity in pieces around me, was that the worst day of my life was about to become the first day of my real life. I didn't know that a restaurant, a stranger, a single act of kindness would become the portal to everything I'd always needed, but never had. This isn't a story about getting revenge on the people who hurt me, though they definitely faced the natural consequences of their choices. This isn't about payback or making them suffer or proving them wrong, though all of those things happened organically. This is about justice, the real kind, the lasting kind, the kind that happens when you stop fighting for scraps from people who see you as a burden and start accepting abundance from people who see you as a gift. This is about reclaiming self-worth that was stolen piece by piece over 34 years of being the scapegoat, the problem, the one who always caused drama by having needs and boundaries and the audacity to ask why I deserved so little. And this is about the shocking discovery that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choice, consistency, showing up, and loving someone even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I'm going to take you back to that phone call, to those 7 words that changed everything, to the pattern of betrayal that made them possible, to the Thanksgiving I spent alone that became the beginning of being found. I'm going to tell you about Eleanor Morrison, a stranger who saw me crying in a restaurant and decided I belonged at her table, who became my mother not through biology, but through choice, through legal adoption, through years of proving that real love doesn't waver. I'm going to tell you about finding romance in the safety of chosen family, about a man who loved me not despite my trauma, but through helping me heal it, about a wedding where my biological parents watched from the back row as better people claimed the roles they'd abandoned. But here's what I need you to understand before we start. This story isn't about them. It's not about my mother's cruelty or my father's silence or my sister's golden child comfort or the family drama they created and blamed on me. This is about me, about surviving being unloved by the people who should have loved me most, about the shocking grace of being chosen when you've spent your whole life begging to belong, about karma that looks like court-ordered adoption papers and a table full of people who show up, about vengeance that tastes like freedom dipped in champagne and covered in unconditional love. They thought they were exiling me. The revealed truth? They were liberating me. And what happened next, in the years between that cruel phone call and that wedding where I stood at the head of my own chosen family, that's the story that needs to be told, because somewhere out there, someone is sitting alone, believing they're unlovable, waiting to discover that sometimes betrayal is just the universe making room for something infinitely better. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the moment everything fell apart so it could finally, actually come together. My name is Leah Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and 7 words changed my entire existence 3 days before Thanksgiving. Don't bother coming home, Leah. Emma doesn't want drama. That's what my mother said over the phone, her voice flat like she was reading a grocery list, not exiling her own daughter from the family table. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart literally stopped for a second, and I had to sit down on my apartment floor because my legs just gave out. The truth hit me like a freight train. I wasn't being excluded for something I did. I was being erased because my sister wanted a perfect holiday photo without the scapegoat in it. This wasn't new, but hearing it out loud, so casual, so final, that was the moment I realized I'd been fighting for scraps of love from people who saw me as an inconvenience. I stood there in my tiny Chicago apartment, phone still pressed against my ear even though she'd already hung up, and the silence felt like it was swallowing me whole. Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming or broken dishes. Sometimes it arrives in a calm, dismissive sentence that cuts deeper than any knife ever could. My mother hadn't even paused to ask how I was, hadn't offered an explanation, hadn't given me a chance to defend myself against accusations I didn't even know existed. The backstabbed feeling settled into my chest like ice, spreading through every memory I had of trying to belong in that family. I thought about all the times I'd been told I was too sensitive or making things difficult. And suddenly those words felt less like observations and more like a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep me in my place. What I didn't know yet was that this rejection, this humiliation, would become the doorway to something I never imagined possible. Growing up, I'd always been the one who asked too many questions, who noticed when things didn't add up, who refused to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Emma, my younger sister by 3 years, had mastered the art of being exactly what our parents wanted. Quiet, agreeable, never rocking the boat even when it was sinking. The family drama always seemed to orbit around me, or at least that's how they framed it, like I was some chaos agent disrupting their perfect little world. But the shocking reality was that I was just the mirror reflecting back all the dysfunction they refused to acknowledge. Every time I pointed out the lies, the broken promises, the casual cruelty disguised as tough love, I became the problem instead of the person trying to solve it. And now, apparently, my very presence at Thanksgiving was too much drama for Emma's delicate sensibilities. I spent that entire evening replaying every family gathering, every holiday, every moment where I'd felt like an outsider in my own bloodline. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't unsee it. I'd been the scapegoat my entire life, the designated villain in their story so they could all play the heroes. My dignity had been chipped away so gradually that I hadn't even noticed until there was almost nothing left. Revenge wasn't even on my radar yet. I was still stuck in the shock phase, trying to understand how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could discard me so easily. The infidelity wasn't romantic. It was familial. A betrayal of the most sacred bond. The one you're born into and taught to trust above all others. I kept thinking, there has to be more to this. There has to be a reason. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some people don't need a reason to hurt you. They just need permission from each other. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I let myself feel the full weight of it without trying to fix it, without making excuses for them, without convincing myself I was overreacting. The humiliation of being uninvited to a family holiday burned through me like acid, but underneath it was something else, something I'd been avoiding for years. Relief. A tiny, terrifying part of me was actually relieved that I didn't have to perform normalcy at that table. Didn't have to pretend my father's silence wasn't deafening. Didn't have to watch Emma play the golden child while I sat there wondering what I'd done wrong this time. Karma felt like a distant concept, something that happened to other people in movies, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was somehow significant, like a chapter ending even though I hadn't chosen to close the book. I didn't know it then, but that phone call was the beginning of reclaiming something I'd lost a long time ago: my self-worth. The apartment felt smaller that night, the walls closing in as I tried to imagine what Thanksgiving would look like now. Me, alone, in a city where I'd only lived for 8 months, with no backup plan and no family to fall back on. I'd moved to Chicago for a fresh start after grad school, hoping distance might make the heart grow fonder, but apparently it just made me easier to erase. The shamed feeling crept in, that voice in my head whispering that maybe they were right, maybe I was too much, too difficult, too broken to deserve a place at the table. But then I remembered something my college roommate once told me. The ones who accuse you of causing drama are usually the ones writing the script. I didn't understand what she meant back then, but sitting there on my living room floor, phone still in my hand, I finally got it. And that understanding, painful as it was, became the first crack in the foundation of lies I'd been standing on my whole life. The memories started flooding back the moment I hung up the phone, uninvited and relentless, like my brain was finally ready to show me the evidence I'd been ignoring for decades. My 10th birthday party, canceled 3 hours before it was supposed to start because Emma had a cold, nothing serious, just sniffles, but apparently serious enough to derail the one day that was supposed to be mine. I remember standing in our kitchen, balloons already hung, cake sitting on the counter, and my mother telling me, "We can't be selfish, Leah. Family comes first." As if wanting to celebrate my own birthday was some kind of moral failing. The betrayal of that moment didn't hit me then because I was just a kid trying to be good, trying to understand. But looking back now, I see it clearly. I was being trained to disappear. My father stood there in the doorway, reading the newspaper, not saying a single word, and that silence spoke volumes. I would never be chosen, not over Emma, not over anyone. High school graduation was supposed to be different. I'd worked so hard, graduated with honors, earned a partial scholarship to a good university, and I actually believed my parents would show up this time. The ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon. Plenty of notice, no conflicts, and they promised they'd be there. Front row, camera ready. But the night before, Emma decided she wanted to tour a college campus 3 states away. And suddenly my graduation became not that big of a deal compared to her future. I couldn't believe they'd actually choose a casual campus visit over watching me walk across that stage, but they did, and I sat there in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd for faces that never appeared. The truth was right there in that empty seat, screaming at me, but I still found ways to justify it. They're busy, they're stressed, maybe I'm being too sensitive. My best friend's parents took photos of me, hugged me, told me they were proud, and I smiled through the humiliation while something inside me quietly shattered. Every major milestone became a negotiation, a battle I had to fight just to get basic acknowledgement, and somehow, I always lost. When I got accepted to grad school, my mother's first response wasn't congratulations. It was, "Well, that's going to be expensive. I hope you're not expecting us to help." When I landed my first real job, my father said, "That's nice," and went back to watching TV. But when Emma got engaged, you would have thought she'd won the Nobel Prize. There were phone calls, celebrations, a family dinner where everyone toasted to her happiness while I sat there wondering if I was invisible. The gaslighting was so constant, so normalized, that I started believing their narrative. I was difficult. I expected too much. I created problems where none existed. Shocking as it sounds now, I actually apologized to them once for always needing attention. And they accepted that apology like it was their due, like I'd finally seen the light and understood my place in the family hierarchy. The pattern was so clear, so consistent, that it became my normal. I was the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who could be canceled without consequence. Family drama, they called it whenever I pointed out the imbalance, the favoritism, the casual cruelty that colored every interaction. "You're always starting something, Leah," my mother would say, her voice dripping with exasperation, as if asking to be treated with basic respect was some kind of revolutionary act. My father's silence was even worse because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. He saw it, he knew it was wrong, but he would never, ever choose me over keeping the peace. Payback didn't even cross my mind during those years. I was too busy trying to earn love that should have been freely given, too busy contorting myself into someone they might finally accept. The dignity I was losing, piece by piece, didn't seem important compared to the desperate need to belong somewhere, to someone. Looking back from that Chicago apartment floor, 3 days before a Thanksgiving I'd been banned from, I could finally see the architecture of my own diminishment. Every canceled birthday, every missed graduation, every dismissive comment had been a brick in a wall designed to keep me small, keep me grateful for scraps, keep me from questioning why I deserved so little from the people who were supposed to love me most. The lies I'd been told weren't always verbal. Sometimes they were in the actions, the priorities, the deafening silence when I needed someone to speak up for me. I'd been cheated out of a normal family experience, not through one dramatic event, but through 1,000 tiny cuts that bled me dry over 34 years. Infidelity to the parent-child bond, I realized, doesn't require another person. It just requires choosing comfort over courage, pretense over truth, the golden child over the scapegoat, again and again and again. That night, I made a list. Not of grievances, but of moments. Just moments, where I'd been made to feel like I was asking for too much by asking for anything at all. The list got longer than I expected, filling pages in my journal, and with each memory I wrote down, something shifted inside me. This wasn't about revenge or payback or proving them wrong. This was about finally seeing the truth without the filter of hope, without the lies I'd been telling myself to survive. My self-worth had been held hostage by people who didn't value it. And the shocking revelation wasn't that they'd treated me this way, but that I'd allowed it for so long, believing somehow that if I just tried harder, loved better, asked for less, they'd eventually see me. My father's silence echoed through every memory, a constant reminder that love, for some people, is conditional, selective, and devastatingly finite. And somewhere in that realization, in the grief of accepting what would never change, a door began to open, not to bitterness, but to something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Thanksgiving morning arrived like a slow-motion car crash I'd been watching for 3 days but couldn't stop. I woke up in my Chicago apartment to silence. No chaotic family group chat buzzing with, "What should I bring?" messages. No phone calls about traffic or cooking times. Just the empty, echoing quiet of being completely alone on a day designed for togetherness. The snow was falling outside my window, those big, beautiful flakes that make the city look like a snow globe. And all I could think was how I'd imagined this day so differently. Driving to my parents' house, bracing myself for the usual tension, but at least being there, at least having a place. Instead, I was here, uninvited, erased, and the humiliation of it settled over me like a second skin. I'd never spent a holiday completely alone before, and the weight of it felt like something physical pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to distract myself, put on the Macy's parade, started making coffee, told myself this was fine. This was freedom. This was an opportunity to do whatever I wanted without judgment. But the lies we tell ourselves on hard days are the cruelest kind, aren't they? Every commercial showing families gathered around tables, every social media post from friends talking about their relatives, every bit of normalcy everyone else got to experience just highlighted how profoundly I'd been backstabbed by the people who were supposed to protect me. Around noon, I made the mistake of checking Instagram, and there it was, posted by my mother, of all people, a perfectly staged photo of my entire family around the Thanksgiving table, everyone smiling, Emma glowing in the center like a Madonna, my father carving the turkey, and not a single empty chair to indicate I'd ever existed. The betrayal of that image, the casual cruelty of posting it publicly, knowing I'd see it, knowing it would hurt. That's when I realized this wasn't neglect or oversight. This was intentional erasure. I sat there staring at that photo for probably 20 minutes, zooming in on every face, looking for some sign of remorse, some hint that anyone missed me or felt conflicted about excluding me. But there was nothing. Just practiced, perfect smiles and a table set for exactly the right number of people. The truth of my position in that family had never been clearer. I wasn't just the scapegoat. I was the inconvenient memory they were actively trying to delete. Shocking how much that photo hurt. More than the phone call, more than the years of being sidelined. Because it was proof that they were happier, lighter, better without me there. I couldn't believe how easily they'd moved on. How seamlessly the family portrait worked without me in it. Like I'd been the smudge they'd finally wiped clean. My self-worth, already on life support, flatlined completely in that moment. If my own family could be this content without me, what did that say about who I was, what I was worth, whether I deserved to be loved at all? The apartment felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, and I knew I had to get out before I completely fell apart. I'd skipped breakfast, couldn't stomach the idea of cooking for one, and the hunger mixing with the emotional devastation was making me lightheaded. There was this restaurant I'd walked past a few times, Lighthouse Grill down by the waterfront. The place hosted a community Thanksgiving every year for people who didn't have anywhere else to go, and I figured that's exactly what I was now. A charity case, someone to be pitied, alone on a holiday designed to celebrate family. The walk there was brutal, passing houses with warm lights glowing in windows, hearing laughter spilling out onto sidewalks, watching actual functional families exist in a way mine never had. Every step felt like an admission of failure, like I was walking proof that something about me was fundamentally unlovable, unfixable, unworthy of the basic human experience of belonging. When I got to Lighthouse Grill, the hostess gave me that look. You know the one. That mix of pity and curiosity that says, "Oh, you're alone on Thanksgiving? How sad." And seated me at a small table by the window where I could watch the snow and pretend I'd chosen this. Pretend this was empowering solitude instead of devastating isolation. The restaurant was full of families, couples, groups of friends, all of them laughing and passing dishes and creating memories, and I sat there with my water glass and paper menu feeling like I was watching life happen through soundproof glass, present but not participating, existing but not living. I ordered the turkey dinner special because what else do you do on Thanksgiving? And when it arrived, perfectly plated and impersonal, I just stared at it, unable to take a single bite. The dignity I'd been clinging to all day finally crumbled, and I started crying right there in the middle of the restaurant. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs I couldn't control. Grief pouring out of me for everything I'd lost, and everything I'd never actually had to begin with. I tried to pull myself together, wiping my face with the paper napkin, mortified that other people could see me falling apart, when I felt someone standing next to my table. I looked up, expecting the server to tell me I needed to leave or ask if I was okay in that obligatory way people do when they don't actually want to get involved. But instead, I saw this woman, older, maybe in her late 60s, with kind eyes and this warm, concerned expression that wasn't pity, wasn't judgment, just genuine human compassion. "Honey," she said, her voice soft but clear, "I don't know your story, but I know that look, and I know nobody should be alone on Thanksgiving unless they choose to be. My family and I," she gestured to a large table across the room where several people were watching with similar expressions of concern, "would be honored if you'd join us. We've got plenty of room, plenty of food, and what we really have is plenty of love to go around." And in that moment, something shifted, some cosmic gear clicking into place. And I had no idea that this stranger's invitation would become the single most important turning point of my entire life. I almost said no. My first instinct was to politely decline, to insist I was fine, to protect myself from the vulnerability of accepting kindness from strangers when my own family had just rejected me. But something in this woman's eyes stopped me. This Eleanor Morrison, who stood there patiently waiting for my answer, not rushing me, not making me feel like a burden, just offering something I hadn't experienced in so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Unconditional welcome. "I don't want to intrude," I managed to say through my tears, my voice cracking on every word. And she just smiled this smile that felt like coming home. "Sweetheart, you're not intruding. We're inviting. There's a difference, and it's time you learned what that difference feels like." The truth in her words hit me like lightning, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was nodding, standing up, following her across the restaurant to a table full of people I'd never met who were about to change everything. They made room immediately, literally scooted chairs, grabbed another place setting, rearranged the entire table dynamic without a single complaint or hesitation. Like absorbing a stranger into their Thanksgiving was the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor introduced me to everyone. Her husband, Richard, a gentleman with laugh lines around his eyes who shook my hand like I was someone important. Their son, Marcus, probably close to my age, who gave me this understanding nod that said he knew what it felt like to hurt. Their daughter, Olivia, and her wife, Carmen, who immediately started piling food on my plate like feeding me was their personal mission. And two family friends, James and Sophia, who treated me like I'd been part of this group. Forever. I couldn't believe how easily they absorbed me, how naturally they included me in conversations, how nobody asked invasive questions about why I was alone or made me feel like I owed them my trauma as payment for their kindness. For the first time all day, maybe for the first time in years, I laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from your belly and lights up your whole chest. The family drama I'd been marinating in for 3 days started to feel less heavy as the afternoon went on, replaced by this bizarre but beautiful experience of being chosen by people who had no obligation to choose me. Richard told terrible dad jokes that made everyone groan but secretly smile. Carmen shared stories about her disastrous attempts at cooking her first Thanksgiving. Marcus talked about his work as a social worker with this passion that made his whole face light up. And Eleanor, she watched all of it with this quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching my eye and smiling like she knew something I didn't yet. They asked about me too, genuine questions about my work, my interests, my life in Chicago, and they actually listened to my answers, asked follow-up questions, treated my words like they mattered. The shocking part wasn't that strangers could be kind. It was that kindness could feel this effortless, this natural, this free of conditions and expectations and the exhausting work of earning basic respect. Somewhere between the pumpkin pie and the third round of coffee, Eleanor leaned over and said something that would stick with me forever. "You know, honey, I spent 35 years as a family lawyer, and I learned something important. The people who accuse others of causing drama are almost always the ones writing the script. They need someone to blame for the dysfunction they refuse to acknowledge in themselves." I just stared at her, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, because nobody had ever validated my experience like that. Nobody had ever given me permission to see the betrayal for what it was without immediately jumping to, "But they're your family," or "I'm sure they didn't mean it." She continued, her voice gentle but firm. "Whatever happened to make you spend today alone, I can almost guarantee it wasn't about you. It was about them needing a scapegoat so they could avoid looking at their own issues. And the fact that you're here, that you're surviving it, that you're open enough to accept kindness from strangers, that tells me you're going to be just fine. Better than fine, actually. The payback I'd thought I wanted, some dramatic confrontation, some moment where my family would realize their mistake and beg for forgiveness, suddenly felt small and pointless compared to this, to being seen and valued by people who had no history with me, no agenda, no reason to lie or manipulate or gaslight. Vengeance, I realized, wasn't about making them hurt the way they'd hurt me. It was about building a life so full, so rich, so genuine that their rejection became irrelevant. Eleanor's words planted something in me, this tiny seed of possibility that maybe I'd been looking for family in the wrong place, that maybe blood didn't matter as much as choice, that maybe the people who'd humiliated me by erasing me from their table had actually done me a favor by forcing me to find something better. Richard refilled my wine glass and said, "You know, Eleanor collects strays, that's what I call it, but she calls it recognizing family when she sees it. Fair warning, once you're in, you're in. She doesn't do casual friendship." Before we left the restaurant, Eleanor pressed her business card into my hand, fancy embossed paper with her name and a phone number, nothing else. And she wrote something on the back in elegant script. "Sunday dinners, 6 p.m., every week. You're expected. Not invited, not welcome if convenient, but expected, like my presence was already assumed, already valued, already non-negotiable." "I mean it," she said, holding my hands in hers, her grip warm and firm. "Every Sunday. We eat too much, we argue about politics, we laugh until we can't breathe, and we show up for each other. That's what family does. Not because they have to, but because they want to. And I want you there, Leah. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I see something in you, something that belongs at my table." The infidelity my biological family had committed against our bond suddenly felt less like an ending and more like a liberation. And as I walked home through the snow that night, full of actual good food and something that felt dangerously close to hope, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, karma wasn't about revenge at all. It was about being redirected toward the life you were actually meant to live. The first Sunday dinner, I almost didn't go. I stood outside Eleanor's brownstone in Lincoln Park for a solid 10 minutes, convincing myself this was weird, that I was imposing, that they'd probably forgotten they even invited me and would be confused when I showed up. But then Marcus opened the door, saw me hovering on the sidewalk like a nervous ghost, and called out, "Leah, Mom said if you didn't show up, I had to come find you and drag you back. Get in here before the lasagna gets cold." The casual certainty in his voice, like my presence was expected and my absence would have been noticed, did something to my nervous system. I actually felt my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. That first dinner turned into a second, then a third, and before I knew it, Sunday evenings became the anchor of my entire week, the thing I looked forward to, the place where I could exhale and just exist without performance or pretense. Eleanor's home was everything mine had never been. Loud in the best way, full of overlapping conversations and spontaneous laughter and people actually listening to each other instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. Richard would cook these elaborate meals, not because he had to, but because he genuinely loved feeding people. Olivia and Carmen would show up with wine and stories from their week. James and Sophia became like surrogate aunt and uncle, always asking about my work and remembering small details I'd mentioned weeks ago. And Marcus, he became my friend first, this quiet, thoughtful presence who never pushed but was always there, who understood what it felt like to doubt your worth because he'd done his own work to rebuild his. The family betrayal I was still processing didn't magically disappear, but it started to matter less, its sharp edges dulling under the consistent weight of being chosen, week after week, without conditions or demands, or the exhausting labor of earning my keep. Months passed like that. Sunday dinners, then coffee with Marcus on Wednesdays, then holiday celebrations where I was included without question, where my dietary preferences were remembered and my opinions were valued, and my presence was treated like a gift instead of a burden. The truth about family, the real truth that nobody had ever taught me, revealed itself slowly. It's not about biology or obligation. It's about showing up, about consistency, about creating space for someone and then protecting that space fiercely. I couldn't believe how different life felt when you weren't constantly bracing for rejection, when you could relax into relationships without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Eleanor became the mother figure I'd always needed. Not perfect, not without her own flaws, but present, supportive, willing to have hard conversations and call me on my bullshit while still making it clear that her love wasn't conditional on my performance. My dignity, that thing I'd thought was lost forever, started growing back in that environment. Not because anyone handed it to me, but because I was finally in a space where I could remember who I was before years of being the scapegoat had convinced me I was fundamentally flawed. Marcus and I grew closer in this organic way that felt nothing like the desperate, anxious relationships I'd tried to force in my 20s. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, and the shocking thing was how safe it felt, how I could be completely myself without fear of judgment or abandonment. One night, about 8 months after that first Thanksgiving, we were walking through Millennium Park after dinner, and he just stopped, looked at me, and said, "You know I'm falling in love with you, right? And I need you to know it's not because I feel sorry for you or because my mom orchestrated this. It's because you're brilliant and funny and resilient as hell, and being around you makes me want to be better." The backstabbed, humiliated, shamed person I'd been a year ago would have never believed she deserved to hear those words. But the person I was becoming, the one being rebuilt by chosen family, she believed it. Our relationship grew from that foundation of friendship and trust, nothing rushed or forced, just this natural evolution from, "I enjoy your company," to, "I can't imagine my life without you," to, "Let's build something together." Richard gave Marcus this knowing look the first time we showed up to Sunday dinner holding hands, and Eleanor actually got teary-eyed, which she tried to hide but failed spectacularly. "I knew it," she kept saying. "I knew from that first Thanksgiving. I saw it. I saw how you two looked at each other." Olivia rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you say that about everyone." But even she was smiling. And Carmen raised her glass in a toast to love that grows from good soil instead of desperation. The payback my biological family would never know they'd given me was this. By rejecting me, they'd forced me to find people who actually valued me. And in that space, I'd found not just family, but partnership, romance, the kind of love that's built on respect and choice rather than obligation and control. A year and a half after that snowy Thanksgiving, Marcus proposed during Sunday dinner, because of course he did, because that table had become our sacred space, the place where our love had been witnessed and supported and celebrated from the very beginning. He didn't make a big production of it, just got down on one knee after dessert, while Eleanor pretended she wasn't crying, and Richard pretended he was surprised even though Marcus had asked for his blessing weeks ago, and he said, "Leah Mitchell, you walked into our family when you needed us. But somewhere along the way, I realized I needed you just as much. Will you marry me? Will you officially become a Morrison and make my mother the happiest woman alive?" I said yes through tears and laughter, and the room erupted in cheers, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the people I was supposed to be with. The infidelity my birth family had committed against me had led me here, to this moment, to this overwhelming sense of rightness, and I almost wanted to thank them for being too broken to love me properly, because their brokenness had pushed me toward wholeness. Planning a wedding brings up all sorts of family questions that I thought I'd moved past, but there I was, 6 months engaged, staring at invitation templates that all said parents of the bride, and feeling that old familiar knot in my stomach. Marcus and I were sitting at Eleanor and Richard's dining room table, because where else would we plan our wedding? And I mentioned, trying to sound casual, that maybe we should just do Leah Mitchell and Marcus Morrison invite you, and skip the parental involvement entirely. Eleanor looked up from her notes, that sharp lawyer gaze that missed nothing, and said, "Or we could address the elephant in the room. What do you actually want, Leah? Not what's easier, not what avoids confrontation. What would make this day feel right to you?" The truth was, I wanted parents who actually cared, who would be proud to stand beside me, who would celebrate this moment instead of making it about them or creating drama. But I couldn't exactly order new parents off Amazon. The conversation that followed changed everything in ways I never saw coming. Eleanor asked if I'd had any contact with my biological family since that Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and I admitted I hadn't. Radio silence both ways, a mutual ghosting that had felt like relief at the time, but now felt like unfinished business. "They don't even know I'm engaged," I said, and hearing those words out loud made me realize how profoundly I'd been erased from their story, just as they'd been erased from mine. Richard, ever the gentle mediator, suggested maybe I didn't owe them anything, that chosen family was just as real and valid as blood family, that plenty of people walk down the aisle without their birth parents and live beautiful, full lives. But Marcus, he looked at me with those eyes that see right through my defenses and asked, "But is that what you want? Or is that what you think you deserve?" And damn him for knowing the difference, for seeing that part of me still believed I wasn't worthy of a traditional family structure, that the betrayal and backstabbing had convinced me I should settle for less. Eleanor set down her pen, leaned back in her chair, and said something that made my heart stop. "There's a legal process called adult adoption. It's exactly what it sounds like. One adult legally adopting another. I've facilitated several over my career, usually in cases where chosen family wants to make their bond official, where legal rights and inheritance and hospital visitation matter, where the symbolism of making it real on paper carries weight." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Richard and I have been talking, and we'd like to offer you that option, Leah. Not as a replacement for your birth parents, not as a statement against them, but as an acknowledgement of what's already true. You're our daughter in every way that matters, and if you want to make that legal, if you want to carry our name into your marriage, if you want us to be the parents of the bride not just emotionally but officially, we would be honored beyond words." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The shocking generosity of it, the sheer rightness of it, hit me like a physical force. The justice of it all, that's what got me. What made me start crying right there at that table where I'd been fed and loved and seen for 2 years straight. Here was karma in its truest form, not revenge against the people who'd hurt me, but restoration of what had been stolen, a reclaiming of the family experience I'd been denied my whole life. "You'd do that?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper, and Richard reached across the table to take my hand. "Leah, we're already doing it. We have been since you walked into that restaurant, and Eleanor decided you belong to us. This is just paperwork catching up to reality. The question isn't whether we want to, it's whether you want to, whether you're ready to close one chapter and fully embrace this one." Marcus was crying too, and Olivia, who'd been listening from the kitchen, came in and just wrapped her arms around me, and Carmen was right behind her. And suddenly, I was surrounded by this family that had chosen me when I had nothing to offer them except my broken, traumatized self. The humiliation I'd felt 2 years ago, being uninvited to Thanksgiving, being erased from family photos, being made to feel like my very existence was drama. It transformed in that moment from a wound into a scar, from an open injury into evidence of survival. Vengeance had never been about making them pay. It had been about building a life so authentic, so full of genuine love and belonging, that their rejection became the best thing that ever happened to me. I said yes. Of course I said yes. And we started the legal process the following week. We'd begun gathering documents and filing paperwork months earlier, but the final adoption hearing, the day it became official, was 6 weeks before the wedding. That timing meant everything. I would walk down the aisle as Leah Morrison, legally Eleanor and Richard's daughter, with court documents to prove what my heart had known for years. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was being reborn into a family that actually wanted me, and this time I wasn't the scapegoat or the inconvenience or the source of drama. I was the daughter, chosen and loved and legally recognized as belonging. 6 weeks before the wedding, we went to court for the final adoption hearing. Me, Eleanor, Richard, Marcus, Olivia, and Carmen, all dressed up like it was already the big day. The judge, a kind woman who'd clearly done dozens of these, smiled at us and said, "This is my favorite kind of case, where love is being documented, not disputed. Congratulations on making official what your hearts already knew." when she signed the papers, when it became legal, when I officially became Leah Morrison, daughter of Eleanor and Richard Morrison. I felt something shift in my DNA, like my body finally recognized I was safe. I was home. I was exactly where I belonged. The lied to, cheated, betrayed version of me from 2 years ago would have never believed this was possible. Would have thought chosen family was a nice idea, but not the real thing. But standing there in that courtroom, I knew with absolute certainty that this was more real than anything I'd ever experienced before. Eleanor and Richard weren't replacing the parents who'd failed me. They were being the parents I should have had all along, and the shocking grace of that, the unexpected mercy of the universe giving me a second chance at family, it was almost too much to hold. We celebrated that night at Sunday dinner, naturally, and Eleanor made a toast that wrecked me. To Leah, who taught us that family isn't diminished by addition, it's expanded. You didn't take anything from us by joining us. You gave us the gift of loving you, of being the people you needed, of proving that it's never too late to rewrite your story. We're so proud to call you our daughter, and we can't wait to stand beside you as parents of the bride in 6 weeks. The infidelity my birth parents had committed against the sacred parent-child bond had been erased, replaced, upgraded to something real and chosen and permanent. My self-worth, once contingent on their approval, now rested firmly in the knowledge that I was lovable, that I was worthy, that my very existence wasn't drama, but gift. And as we sent out wedding invitations listing, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Morrison request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter, Leah Morrison, to Marcus Morrison, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so beautiful, so authentic, so full of real love that the people who rejected you become irrelevant to your happiness. Sometimes karma looks like court-ordered adoption papers and a family that shows up because they want to, not because they have to. The wedding invitations had been out for 3 weeks when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. My mother, calling like no time had passed, like she hadn't erased me from existence, like the silence between us had been mutual instead of her choice imposed on me. I almost didn't answer, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but curiosity won out, that terrible human need to know what people want when they finally decide you're worth their time again. "Leah, honey, I heard you're getting married," she said, her voice saccharine sweet, like we talked every day, like she hadn't told me not to come home and then never checked if I survived that rejection. The betrayal of hearing honey after years of nothing made my stomach turn. But I stayed quiet, waiting to see where this was going, already knowing but needing to hear it anyway. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the years of silence, didn't ask how I'd been or whether I was happy, or how I'd managed to build an entire life without them. She just launched into how excited the family was about the wedding, how Emma and her husband would love to attend, how my father was looking forward to walking me down the aisle like that was still his right, like he hadn't forfeited that privilege through years of choosing silence over support. I couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer gall of assuming they were still entitled to major life moments after explicitly excluding me from theirs. "We saw your invitation," she continued, and something in her voice shifted, became tight and confused. "But there must be a mistake with the wording. It says Mr. and Mrs. Richard Morrison as your parents. Is that Marcus's parents? Are they hosting because we didn't know about it?" The truth was about to get very uncomfortable for her, and I found myself savoring that in a way that probably wasn't entirely healthy, but felt absolutely necessary. "No mistake, Mom," I said, using the word deliberately, knowing it might be one of the last times I ever called her that. "Eleanor and Richard Morrison are my parents, legally." The adoption was finalized 10 months ago. We'd started the process months before that, but the final hearing was just before the wedding. Adult adoption, completely legal, completely official. They're listed on the invitation as parents of the bride because that's what they are. The silence on the other end was deafening, and I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting, trying to process how I'd replaced them, how I'd made it official, how I'd moved on so completely that I'd literally changed my legal family structure. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp, defensive, stripped of that fake sweetness. "That's ridiculous, Leah. You can't just adopt new parents because your feelings were hurt. We're your real family, and we have a right to be at your wedding, to be acknowledged as your parents, to be part of this day." And there it was. The gaslighting, the minimizing, the "your feelings were hurt," as if being uninvited to Thanksgiving and then ghosted for 3 years was equivalent to a minor disagreement about dinner plans. The shocking thing was how calm I felt, how clear, how absolutely certain that I'd made the right choice in every decision that had led to this moment. "You had a right to be my parents," I said, my voice steady. "But you gave up that right when you chose Emma's comfort over my presence, when you erased me from family photos, when you spent 3 years not once checking if I was alive or dead or happy or suffering. Eleanor and Richard didn't adopt me because my feelings were hurt. They adopted me because they've been my parents in every meaningful way for almost 3 years, because they showed up, because they chose me consistently, because they proved that family is about action, not just biology." I could hear her sputtering on the other end, starting to argue, and I cut her off. "You're welcome to attend the wedding as guests if you'd like. I'll send you information about the venue and the hotel block. But you need to understand, you won't be walking me down the aisle, you won't be in the family photos, you won't be introduced as parents of the bride. That role belongs to people who earned it." She hung up on me. Of course she did, because people who create drama always accuse others of causing it when they're confronted with consequences. My father called an hour later, his first words to me in 3 years, and they were, "Your mother is very upset. This adoption thing is cruel, Leah. We're your parents and you're embarrassing us by replacing us. Not, 'I'm sorry,' not, 'I missed you,' not, 'I was wrong to stay silent.' Just concern about embarrassment, about optics, about how this looked to other people." The payback I'd never consciously sought was happening organically, naturally, as a simple result of me choosing myself and them facing the reality of what they'd lost. "Dad," I said, using every ounce of the dignity I'd reclaimed over the past 3 years, "you were my father, and you could have been still, but you chose not to be. You chose silence when I needed support. You chose peace over protecting me. You chose Emma over and over and over, and I finally chose myself. If you're embarrassed, that's something you need to work through, but it's not my job to manage your feelings about consequences you created." The calls kept coming over the next week. My mother again, Emma for the first time in years sounding confused and hurt that she wasn't invited to be a bridesmaid, distant relatives I barely knew asking why I was disowning my family, all of them acting like I was the one causing family drama by having boundaries, by choosing people who actually loved me, by refusing to let them back into my life on their terms. The lies they'd told themselves about our family dynamic were crumbling, and instead of examining their behavior, they wanted me to fix it by pretending the last 3 years hadn't happened, by giving them access to my joy without requiring them to acknowledge their role in my pain. Karma, I realized, wasn't something I'd imposed on them. It was simply them discovering that actions have consequences, that people you abandon don't wait forever, that relationships require maintenance and you can't just show up for the highlight reel after missing the entire movie. Some of their own relatives started quietly distancing themselves once word got around about what had happened. Apparently, even family loyalty has its limits when the story becomes too obviously one-sided. I blocked most of their numbers after that, kept only my father's in case of genuine emergency, and told Marcus everything. He held me while I cried, not for what I was losing, but for what I'd never really had. For the final death of hope that they might somehow become the family I'd always needed. Eleanor, when I told her, got this fierce, protective look in her eyes and said, "They don't get to do this. They don't get to abandon you and then waltz back in when it's convenient. We're going to make this wedding so full of love, so surrounded by people who actually chose you, that their absence will be a footnote, not a tragedy." And that's exactly what we did. We invited the friends who'd shown up over the years, Marcus's extended family who'd welcomed me warmly, colleagues who'd become confidants, and every single person who'd proven that family is about presence, not genetics. The reclaiming of my narrative, my worth, my right to be celebrated by people who actually valued me, that was the real vengeance, and it tasted like freedom dipped in champagne and covered in joy. Our wedding was in Napa Valley, because of course Eleanor and Richard wanted to do it big, wanted to celebrate not just a marriage but a family finding each other against all odds. The venue was this gorgeous vineyard estate, all rolling hills and golden light, 150 guests who'd traveled from across the country to witness what Eleanor kept calling a love story that started with a turkey dinner and ended with forever. The morning of the wedding, getting ready with Olivia and Carmen and my chosen sisters, women I'd met through the Morrisons who'd become my closest friends, I felt this overwhelming sense of rightness, like every painful moment of the past had been necessary to get me here, to this place, with these people, choosing this life. The humiliation of being rejected by my birth family had transformed entirely into gratitude that I'd been forced to find something better, something real, something that couldn't be taken away on a whim or a mood. I'd sent my biological family the venue information, kept my word about that, but I'd also hired security with their photos just in case they decided to make a scene. They showed up. My mother, father, Emma, and her husband, even my Aunt Linda, who I'd barely spoken to growing up, all dressed like they were attending a funeral. Faces set in this mixture of defiance and hurt, like they were the victims in this story. They sat in the very back row, as far from the family section as physically possible, and I watched them through the bridal suite window, feeling nothing but a distant pity for people so committed to their narrative that they couldn't see how they'd authored their own exclusion. Marcus found me standing there and said, "You okay?" And I realized I was more than okay. I was free, truly free, from the need for their approval, their presence, their validation of my worth. The ceremony started with Eleanor and Richard walking me down the aisle, one on each side, and the symbolism of that, two people who'd chosen me, who'd fought for me, who'd legally and emotionally claimed me as their own, hit me so hard I almost couldn't walk. The look on my biological father's face when he realized he wasn't walking me down the aisle, that his role had been given to someone who'd actually earned it, was something I'll never forget. Not because I enjoyed his pain, but because it was visual proof that consequences are real, that you can't abandon people and expect them to save you a seat at the table. Eleanor whispered, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." And Richard added, "Best day of our lives, watching our daughter get married." And the shocking beauty of chosen family becoming legal family becoming forever family almost undid me right there in front of everyone. The MC, our friend David, who'd become close to both Marcus and me over the years, took the microphone during the reception and delivered the moment that would become infamous in our family lore. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite the parents of the bride, Eleanor and Richard Morrison, to the dance floor for a special dance with their daughter Leah." The emphasis on parents of the bride, the deliberate naming of Eleanor and Richard, the public acknowledgement of our chosen family bond. It was perfect, it was right, and it was the payback I'd never asked for but that the universe delivered anyway. I watched my mother's face go white, saw my father stare at his hands, noticed Emma whispering urgently to her husband, and I felt absolutely nothing but relief that they were witnessing but not participating in the happiest day of my life. Dancing with Richard first, then Eleanor, surrounded by 150 people who'd shown up because they wanted to celebrate our love, our family, our joy. That was justice. That was karma. That was revenge of the highest order. Living well, loving deeply, being so thoroughly chosen that the people who'd rejected me became irrelevant to my happiness. Eleanor held me tight during our dance and said, "You know what the best part of this is? In 5 years, in 10 years, in 50 years, you'll still have us. We're not going anywhere, baby girl. You're stuck with us forever, legal binding contract and all." And I laughed through my tears because the infidelity my birth family had committed, the betrayal of their role, Their abandonment of their duty, their casual cruelty disguised as boundary setting, had led me directly to this, to people who understood that family is a verb, an action, a choice you make every single day. The reception continued in this blur of joy and champagne and toasts from people who'd walked alongside me through the rebuilding years. James and Sophia told stories about early Sunday dinners when I was still scared to take up space. Olivia roasted both Marcus and me with perfect comedic timing. Carmen read a poem she'd written about chosen family that left half the room crying. And then Richard stood up, cleared his throat, and delivered a father of the bride speech that devastated everyone. 3 years ago, my wife dragged home a crying girl from a restaurant and announced we were adopting her. I thought she meant emotionally. Turns out she meant legally, officially, permanently. Best decision we never knew we were making. Leah, you didn't just join our family, you completed it. Watching you reclaim your worth, your dignity, your right to be loved properly has been the privilege of my lifetime. Welcome home, daughter. You've been home all along. The backstabbed, lied to, cheated, shamed girl from 3 years ago wouldn't have believed this moment was possible. But the woman I'd become, the one surrounded by real family, real love, real belonging, she knew she deserved every second of it. My biological family left before dinner was served. Couldn't handle watching me be celebrated by people who'd proven that family is about showing up, about consistency, about loving someone even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or requires actual emotional labor. I saw them go, watched them slip out during toasts, and felt absolutely nothing but relief that they were removing themselves rather than forcing me to enforce boundaries on what should have been a perfect day. Marcus caught me watching and asked if I was sad, and I realized I wasn't. I was grateful, actually grateful, that they'd been exactly who they'd always been, that they'd removed any lingering doubt that I'd made the right choice in building a new family from scratch. The shocking truth that nobody tells you about family estrangement. Sometimes the people who leave are doing you the biggest favor of your life, making room for people who actually know how to love you right. 5 years after that wedding, 5 years after I legally became a Morrison and married Marcus, we hosted Thanksgiving at the home we'd built together in Portland. A couple of years after the wedding, Marcus's work brought us to the Pacific Northwest, and we'd created a life there that felt completely ours. Roots we'd chosen. A community we'd built from intention rather than obligation. The table was massive, handmade by Richard as a wedding gift, big enough to seat 20 people comfortably, and every seat was filled. Eleanor and Richard at one end, Marcus and me at the other, Olivia and Carmen with their twin toddlers creating beautiful chaos, James and Sophia who'd become surrogate grandparents to our daughter Emma, named after Eleanor, not my sister, a detail that made Eleanor cry when we told her. Friends who'd become family, family who'd become everything. The reclaiming was complete. I was no longer the girl who'd been uninvited to Thanksgiving. I was the woman hosting it, head of my own table, surrounded by people who'd proven their love through years of showing up. We went around the table sharing what we were grateful for, a tradition Eleanor had started that first Sunday dinner, and we'd maintained religiously. And when it got to me, I looked at the faces of people who'd chosen me, who'd built me back up when I was broken, who'd taught me that betrayal by blood family isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a better one. I'm grateful for being uninvited to Thanksgiving 8 years ago, I said. And everyone laughed because they knew the story, knew how that rejection had led to this, to everything, to the life I couldn't have imagined when I was crying alone in that Chicago apartment. I'm grateful for strangers who became family, for a restaurant that became a portal, for love that grew from safety instead of desperation, for parents who chose me when they didn't have to, for a husband who sees me and stays anyway, for a daughter who'll never know what it's like to beg for scraps of affection from people who should give it freely. The justice of it all still takes my breath away sometimes, not because my biological family got punished, but because I got rewarded. Because the universe bent in my favor, because karma turned out to be about restoration rather than revenge. My parents, my real parents, Eleanor and Richard, raised their glasses in a toast, and Richard said what he always says, to family, Not the one you're born into, but the one you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, Sunday dinner by Sunday dinner. The infidelity my birth family committed against the sacred bond of parent and child had been answered not with vengeance, but with something infinitely better. Proof that you can survive being unloved by the people who should love you most, that you can build something beautiful from the rubble of rejection. That chosen family isn't second best. It's often the best thing that ever happens to you. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Marcus and I stood in our kitchen doing dishes, and my phone buzzed with a message from a number I'd blocked years ago, but that had somehow gotten through. My mother, sending a photo of their Thanksgiving table, just the four of them, her, my father, Emma, and her husband, with a caption, "Missing you today." She only resurfaced when there was an audience to perform for. My wedding, holidays, milestone moments. Never on an ordinary Tuesday when real connection happens. The audacity of it, the assumption that I was missing them, that their table felt incomplete without me after they'd spent years making it clear I wasn't welcome, would have destroyed me 8 years ago. But standing there in my own kitchen, in my own home, with my own family asleep upstairs, and the sounds of my chosen family's laughter still echoing in the walls, I just smiled and deleted it. They were still writing their story where I was the villain, the ungrateful daughter, the one who'd caused drama by having boundaries. And I was living mine where I was the hero, the survivor, the woman who'd turned betrayal into liberation and rejection into the best thing that ever happened to her. The shocking truth about healing from family trauma. It's not about them finally seeing what they lost, or apologizing for what they did, or suffering consequences that match their crimes. It's about you building a life so full, so rich, so surrounded by genuine love that their absence becomes a gift instead of a wound, that their rejection becomes the catalyst for finding people who actually know how to love you right. Vengeance, payback, revenge. Those words had felt so important 3 years into my journey when the wound was still fresh, when I was still bleeding from the betrayal, when I thought justice meant them hurting the way they'd hurt me. But real karma, the kind that actually heals, looks like this. A table full of people who chose you, a daughter who'll grow up knowing she's wanted, a husband who treats your presence like treasure instead of burden, parents who claimed you legally and emotionally and permanently, a life so authentic that the people who rejected you become footnotes in a story that's really about resurrection, not revenge. I never responded to my mother's message, never reached out to my biological family again, never gave them access to the beautiful life I'd built from the ashes of their abandonment. Some people might call that cruel, might say I should have offered grace or second chances or forgiveness. But those people don't understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is protect the peace you fought so hard to create. The dignity I'd reclaimed, the self-worth I'd rebuilt, the family I'd chosen. Those weren't things I was willing to gamble on people who'd already proven they couldn't be trusted with my heart. And honestly, I didn't need their validation, their approval, their presence in my life to feel complete, because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. You don't need everyone to choose you. You just need the right people to choose you. Consistently, permanently, with the kind of love that doesn't waver when things get complicated. My daughter Emma, our Emma, mine and Marcus's and Eleanor and Richard's and this entire chosen family's Emma, will grow up at Sunday dinners, surrounded by people who show up, who keep their promises, who understand that family is about action, not just biology. She'll never know what it's like to beg for scraps of affection, or to be uninvited from holidays, or to wonder if she's loved conditionally. The backstabbed, lied to, cheated, humiliated, shamed girl I used to be gave her that gift by refusing to accept being treated as less than, by walking away from people who couldn't love her properly, by building something new instead of staying in something broken. And every Thanksgiving, when we gather around that enormous handmade table with people who've proven their love through years of consistent choice, I remember that girl crying alone in a Chicago restaurant, and I want to tell her, hold on, The strangers who are about to walk over to you are about to change everything. Your real family is coming. You're going home, finally. Actually home. That's what I'm grateful for, 8 years after that first terrible Thanksgiving, sitting at the head of my own table. Not revenge, not payback, not watching my biological family suffer, but this, the shocking, beautiful, completely unexpected grace of being chosen, being loved, being home. The truth they never wanted me to know was that I didn't need them to have a family. I just needed to find the right family, the one that would see me and stay, the one that would turn a holiday invitation into a lifetime commitment, the one that would prove that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't vengeance. It's building something so beautiful that the people who hurt you become irrelevant to your happiness. And honestly, that's the best revenge of all. Living well, loving deeply, and being so thoroughly chosen that the people who rejected you become a cautionary tale instead of the authors of your story. I won. Not because they lost, but because I built something they could never take away. Something real, something permanent. Something that started with 7 cruel words and ended with a lifetime of chosen love. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation or public humiliation or perfect revenge plot, is justice. Real, lasting, life-changing justice that heals instead of harms. That builds instead of destroys. That turns the worst day of your life into the first day of your real life. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your own family? Have you ever felt the backstabbing pain of being erased by the people who were supposed to protect you? The humiliation of watching them be happy without you? The shocking realization that you were fighting for scraps from people who saw your very existence as drama? I want to know your story, your truth, your moment of reckoning when you finally understood that some family bonds aren't worth preserving. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was your don't come home moment? When did you realize that chosen family might be your real family? Or if you're still in it, still trying to earn love from people who can't give it, what's holding you back from walking away? And here's the harder question, the one that might make you uncomfortable. If you found your Eleanor Morrison, your stranger who became family, would you be brave enough to accept that invitation? Would you let yourself be loved? Properly, consistently, without conditions? Or would you keep going back to the table that has no chair for you? Because here's what I learned, what this entire journey taught me. Dignity can't be reclaimed while you're still begging people who humiliated you to see your worth. Self-worth doesn't grow in soil that's contaminated with betrayal and lies and years of being told you're too much, too sensitive, too difficult. Justice isn't about them finally understanding what they lost. It's about you building something so beautiful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Tell me in the comments, what would reclaiming your life look like? If you could legally, officially, permanently choose your real family, who would it be? What's the payback you actually want? Revenge that makes them hurt, or freedom that makes you whole? And if you've already done it, if you've already walked away from family drama and found your chosen family, I need to hear about it because your story might be the permission someone else needs to finally choose themselves. Don't hold back. This is a safe space for truth, for anger, for grief, for joy, for all the complicated emotions that come with realizing blood doesn't equal love. And sometimes the best thing family can do for you is leave you alone so better people can find you. Here's what I know for sure after 8 years of living this truth. The people who accuse you of causing drama are usually the ones writing the script. The ones who say you're too sensitive are often the ones being cruel. And the family that tells you that you don't belong is doing you the favor of showing you exactly who they are, so you can find people who actually know how to love. Karma isn't about them suffering. It's about you thriving. Vengeance isn't about making them pay. It's about building a life so full they become a footnote in your story of resurrection. And family, real family, the kind that actually matters, is about people who choose you on your worst day and keep choosing you every day after. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in my journey from scapegoat to chosen daughter, If you felt that shocking recognition of your own family betrayal in my words, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because I'm not done telling stories about reclaiming dignity, exposing family lies, and finding justice in unexpected places. I've got more insights coming about surviving narcissistic family systems, about the legal and emotional process of adult adoption, about building chosen family from scratch, about what revenge actually looks like when you're focused on healing instead of hurting. These aren't superficial stories. They're deep dives into the infidelity of broken family bonds, the truth about what happens when you finally stop accepting crumbs, the shocking grace of being loved properly after years of being loved wrong. And one more thing before you go. If you're still at that table with no chair, if you're still waiting for an invitation that's never coming, if you're still trying to earn belonging from people who've already shown you they don't value your presence, this is your sign to leave. Not dramatically, not with some big confrontation that gives them more drama to blame on you, but quietly, powerfully, permanently. Walk away. Find your restaurant, your Eleanor, your chosen family, your people who will fight to keep you instead of fighting to erase you. You deserve Sunday dinners where you're expected, not tolerated. You deserve parents who claim you legally and emotionally and permanently. You deserve a table where there's always a chair with your name on it, where your presence is celebrated, where you can finally, actually, completely exhale and be home. Subscribe if you're ready to hear more stories about what happens when betrayal becomes liberation, when backstabbing becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, when being cheated out of one family leads you directly to the family you were always meant to have. I'll be here every week with more truth, more revelation, more proof that sometimes the worst thing people can do to you is the exact thing that saves your life. Your real family is out there waiting for you. Go find them, and when you do, tell me about it in the comments, because I never get tired of hearing about people choosing themselves, reclaiming their worth, and building lives so beautiful that the people who rejected them become irrelevant. That's real karma. That's real justice. That's real revenge, living so well that their absence becomes a gift instead of a wound.